I have stood guard for 10,000 years, and in all that time I have not known a single day of peace. The statement sounds impossible when spoken aloud. 10 millennia of consciousness without rest, without reprieve, without the merciful oblivion that claims lesser beings. But impossible is what I am, what we are. The Adeptus Custodes, the 10,000, the golden sentinels who stand eternal watch over the master of mankind. We do not sleep as mortals sleep. We do not dream as mortals dream. We simply exist, perfect and unchanging, like the marble pillars that support the weight of the imperial palace above our heads. I stand now in the Hall of Vigilance, as I have stood for the past 3 centuries without interruption. My guardian spear rests against my shoulder, its weight a constant presence that I no longer truly feel. The blade catches the light from 1,000 eternal flames that line these ancient corridors, casting fractured shadows across walls that have not changed since the Emperor himself walked these passages as a living god. The flames burn on sacred oils harvested from a dozen worlds, their scent a mixture of sandalwood and promethium, and something older than memory. I have breathed this air for so long that I no longer notice it. Yet if I were to leave this place for even a single day, I know I would carry that scent with me forever, branded into my perfect recall like everything else I have ever experienced. The marble beneath my armored boots is cold. I know this because my armor's sensors tell me so, translating temperature differentials into data that my enhanced mind processes without conscious thought. But I do not feel the cold as a mortal would feel it. The chill that would seep through cloth and leather and into human bone does not touch me. My body was rebuilt in the Emperor's own laboratories during the Unification Wars, transformed into something that transcends mere flesh. Every organ perfected, every system optimized, every weakness purged until what remained was not a man, but a weapon wrapped in golden auramite and clothed in duty absolute. My armor hums softly with the power that flows through its systems. The sound is so constant that it has become part of the silence rather than a break from it. I hear it in the spaces between my thoughts, in the moments when I am most aware of my own existence. It is the sound of machinery keeping something alive that perhaps should not be alive at all. Not alive in the way mortals understand life, with its brief, bright burning and its necessary ending. I am sustained by technology older than the Imperium itself, maintained by artisans who treat my war plate with more reverence than they show their own children. But it is the silence that defines this existence more than any other quality. The profound, crushing silence of being alone with perfect memory and perfect consciousness for millennia. The Hall of Vigilance stretches before me and behind me, golden, corridors extending into shadows that my enhanced vision pierces with ease. I can see every detail of the Baroque architecture, every sculpted angel and carved aquila, every inscription in High Gothic that proclaims the glory of the Emperor and the eternal nature of his dominion. I have read those inscriptions 10,000 times. I know every word, every letter, every imperfection in the stonework where the artisan's chisel struck too hard or not hard enough. There are other custodians in the palace, thousands of us, spread across chambers and corridors and hidden sanctums where we perform our eternal duty. But I have not spoken to one of my brothers in 17 years, 4 months, and 6 days. Not because we are forbidden to speak, but because there is nothing left to say. We share the same memories of the Emperor's face before the heresy aged it beyond recognition. We share the same grief over the breaking of the Imperium we had sworn to protect. We share the same understanding that we are weapons, not men, and weapons do not require companionship to fulfill their function. I remember what it felt like to be human. The memory is distant now, separated from my current consciousness by the vast gulf of transformation that made me what I am. I was born during the Unification Wars, though the name I carried then is no longer relevant. I was selected as a youth for reasons I understood only after the selection process had already begun its irreversible work. The Emperor looked at me once during my final trials, his ancient eyes holding something that might have been approval or might have been regret. I remember thinking in that moment that I would serve this being with every fiber of my existence. And I have. For 10,000 years, I have kept that wordless promise. But somewhere in those 10,000 years, I forgot why the promise mattered. I forgot what it felt like to want something beyond duty. I forgot the sensation of joy, the ache of loss, the warmth of companionship, the simple pleasure of a task completed not because it was required, but because it brought satisfaction. These are mortal concerns, and I am no longer mortal. I am perfection incarnate, humanity's ultimate defender, the Emperor's personal guard standing eternal watch over the species I was created to protect. And I am alone. Not the momentary solitude that mortals experience and call loneliness, but a profound existential isolation that has become the defining quality of my existence. I stand among humanity, but am no longer of humanity. I guard a species that looks upon me with fear and reverence, but never recognition. They see the golden armor, the guardian spear, the augmented frame that towers over even their largest warriors. They do not see whatever remains of the man who once existed beneath these perfected layers. The weight of my guardian spear is constant. The hum of my armor is constant. The scent of sacred oils is constant. The cold of the marble is constant. Everything is constant because nothing ever changes in the existence of one who cannot die and cannot grow and cannot become anything other than what he already is. I am humanity's perfect defender, and I have forgotten what it feels like to be human. I was not always this. The memory of my creation surfaces unbidden, as all memories do when you possess perfect recall. I cannot forget, cannot soften the edges of what was done to me in those laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains during the final years of the Unification Wars. Every sensation remains crystalline and immediate, as though it happened this morning rather than 10,000 years ago. I was 16 years old when they came for me, still young enough to dream of a future that would never arrive. My name then was something ordinary, something human, but I have not spoken it aloud in millennia and will not speak it now. That boy died in the laboratorium, and what emerged wearing his face was something else entirely. The selection process had identified me months earlier through tests I did not understand, genetic markers and psychic resonance patterns that marked me as suitable raw material for the Emperor's grand design. Suitable. That was the word they used, as though I were clay to be shaped rather than a living being with hopes and fears and the stubborn belief that my life belonged to me. The transformation began with pain. Not the sharp, immediate agony of a wound, but the deep systemic suffering that comes from having your body rebuilt at the cellular level. They placed me in a crystalline chamber filled with alchemical solutions that burned like liquid fire. The fluids entered through every pore, every orifice, carrying genetic restructuring agents that rewrote my very existence. I screamed until my throat bled. I begged until I had no voice left for begging. And still the process continued, methodical and merciless, guided by the Emperor's own specifications for what a perfect guardian should be. The surgeries came next. Not days of surgery, but months. They did not anesthetize me fully because consciousness was required for certain procedures, for the neural pathway integration that would allow my enhanced mind to control my enhanced body. I felt every incision, every implantation, every moment as they opened my chest and placed a second heart beside the first, as they restructured my lungs to process toxins that would kill a normal human in seconds, as they wove synthetic muscle fibers through my existing tissue, strengthening me beyond anything nature had ever intended. I remember the first time they tested my new heart rate, both organs beating in perfect synchronization, pumping blood enriched with chemicals that increased oxygen efficiency by 300%. The sensation was alien, wrong, as though something parasitic had taken root in my chest. I asked the medico if it would always feel this way. He looked at me with eyes that held no sympathy and said that in time I would forget what normal had ever felt like. He was correct. I cannot remember now the sensation of a single heart beating its solitary rhythm. That knowledge died with the boy I used to be. Unlike the Legions Astartes who would come later, we were not mass-produced. The Space Marines, for all their glory and genetic superiority, are manufactured in batches through standardized processes, organs implanted according to rigid specifications, training conducted in cohorts, brotherhood forged through shared suffering and shared purpose. But we custodians were crafted individually, each one a unique work of genetic artistry. The Emperor himself oversaw aspects of our creation, his hands shaping the clay of our genetics with an artist's precision and a tyrant's absolute certainty. I met him during my final trial. By then, I had survived what 90% of candidates did not survive. My body had accepted the modifications. My mind had not shattered under the weight of enhanced cognition that processed information faster than human thought could follow. I stood in a chamber deep beneath the palace, naked except for the scars that covered every inch of my transformed flesh, and waited for judgment. He entered without ceremony. No golden light, no divine radiance, just a man whose eyes held the accumulated weight of 40,000 years of human history. He looked at me, and I felt his gaze penetrate past flesh and bone, and into whatever remained of my soul. Those eyes were ancient beyond comprehension, tired beyond measure, and utterly without mercy. He saw everything I was, everything I had been, everything I could become, and he found me acceptable. "Do you understand what you have become?" he asked. His voice was not loud, but it filled the chamber the way thunder fills a valley. "No, my lord," I answered. My new voice was deeper than it had been, resonating from lungs that were no longer entirely human. "I do not. You have crossed a threshold," he said. "There is no return from what has been done to you. You are no longer of the species you were born to defend. You stand apart from them now, and will stand apart from them forever. This is the price of perfection. Do you accept it?" I should have hesitated. I should have understood the full weight of what he was asking. But I was 16 years old beneath all the genetic manipulation, still young enough to believe that sacrifice was glorious, and that serving something greater than myself would fill whatever emptiness the transformation had carved into my chest. So I answered yes. I accepted the burden without comprehending its true mass. He nodded once, a gesture that might have contained approval or merely acknowledgement. Then he left, and I was escorted to the armoring chambers where artificers waited to clothe me in auramite and ceramite and all the golden trappings of my new station. I remember looking at my reflection in the polished surface of my breastplate. The face that looked back at me was mine, but perfected beyond recognition. Stronger jaw, broader shoulders, eyes that gleamed with enhanced acuity. Everything refined and elevated and made superior, and utterly, completely alone. That understanding came slowly. Years passed after my creation, then decades, then centuries. The unification wars ended and the Great Crusade began, and I stood watch as the Emperor led humanity to reclaim the stars that had been lost during Old Night. My brothers and I performed our duty with mechanical perfection, guarding the master of mankind as he shaped the future of our species. We spoke rarely to one another because words felt inadequate to beings who thought at superhuman speed. A glance could communicate volumes. A gesture could convey entire tactical assessments. Language had become unnecessary, another vestige of humanity we had left behind in our transformation. I thought this was normal. I thought this was correct. I thought the emptiness I felt was simply the clarity that came with purpose, uncluttered by mortal distractions. I was wrong. Her name was Cyrene Valosia, and she came to the palace during the 3rd century of the Great Crusade. A remembrancer, one of those mortal artists and historians who followed the expeditionary fleets to document humanity's return to glory. She had been granted the extraordinary privilege of recording the imperial palace itself, capturing in written form and picked images the seat of mankind's power. I first encountered her in the Hall of Victories, where the banners of conquered worlds hung from vaulted ceilings 300 meters above marble floors. She was small. That was my first thought when I saw her. Small and fragile in a way that made me acutely aware of my own size, my own capacity for destruction. She stood before a tapestry depicting the emperor's triumph over the ethnarchy, her head tilted back to take in the full scope of the artwork, and she was utterly absorbed in the act of observation. I had stood guard in that hall for 17 years without truly seeing the tapestries. They were simply part of the environment, as unchanging and unremarkable as the walls themselves. But she looked at them as though they contained secrets, mysteries, truths worth discovering. She noticed me watching her. Most mortals would have fled or prostrated themselves, or simply frozen in the presence of one of the 10,000. But Cyrene walked toward me with steady steps, her eyes curious rather than afraid. "Forgive the intrusion, my lord," she said. Her voice was softer than I expected, carrying the educated accent of someone from the Terran hive spires. "I am Cyrene Valosia, remembrancer of the 4th Expedition Fleet. I have permission to document these halls." "Permission is not required for explanation," I replied. My voice resonated through my helm's Vox grill, mechanical and cold. "You may continue your work." She should have left, then. Should have returned to her documentation and allowed me to fade back into the static background of my vigil. But instead, she asked, "What is your name?" The question caught me unprepared. No mortal had asked my name in longer than I could easily calculate. To the palace staff, we were simply custodians, interchangeable golden sentinels who required no individual identification. "I am Valdor Aurelius," I said after a pause that lasted 2.3 seconds, but felt longer. "Captain General of the Legio Custodes." "It is an honor to meet you, Captain General," she said, and there was genuine warmth in her tone. Not the fearful reverence most mortals showed, but something simpler. Courtesy, recognition of one being speaking to another. "May I ask you some questions? For the archives?" I should have refused. My duty was to stand watch, not to engage in conversation with mortals about matters of no tactical significance. But something in her directness, her lack of fear, her simple human curiosity, made me answer yes. She asked about my life, what I did when not standing watch, what brought me satisfaction in my service, what dreams I held for humanity's future. Simple questions, the kind mortals ask one another when forming the bonds they call friendship. I attempted to answer and found myself confronting a vast emptiness where such answers should have resided. What did I do when not standing watch? I stood watch in different locations. What brought me satisfaction? The absence of failure. What dreams did I hold? The word dream had no meaning in the context of my existence. Dreams required imagination, required the capacity to envision something beyond present circumstances. I performed my duty. That was all. "You must have some feelings about it." Cyrene pressed gently. Some response to the beauty you guard, the history you witness, the importance of your service. Feelings were refined away in the laboratories, I said, and heard the hollowness in my own words. What remains is purpose. She looked at me then with something I had not seen directed at me in 3 centuries. Pity. Not the fearful reverence of mortals confronted by their superhuman defenders, but genuine sorrow for something lost. I am sorry, she said quietly. That must be very lonely. The word struck me like a physical blow. Lonely. I had not considered my existence in such terms. Loneliness was a mortal affliction, a lack that implied the possibility of fulfillment. But as she spoke the word, something stirred in my chest. Not desire, not affection, but a deep, aching sense of loss for the man I used to be. The boy who had dreamed before they took his dreams away. The youth who had felt before they refined his feelings into nothingness. Yes, I heard myself say. It is. She visited the hall 17 more times over the following weeks. Each time she would speak to me, asking questions that forced me to confront the emptiness at my core. She told me about her life, her work, her hopes to preserve humanity's achievements for future generations. She spoke of small pleasures, the taste of real coffee, the sound of rain on a metal roof, the satisfaction of choosing exactly the right word for a difficult concept. Things so trivial I had not considered them in centuries. Things that suddenly seemed impossibly precious. Cyrene lived for 63 more years. I remember every conversation we had, every word she spoke, every expression that crossed her mortal face. The slight crinkle around her eyes when she smiled. The way her hands moved when she was excited about a discovery. The gradual lines that appeared as age claimed her beauty. She grew old while I remained unchanged, perfect and static, and alone. When word came that she had died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 97, I stood in the Hall of Victories and understood the true cost of immortality. She was gone. Simply, completely, irreversibly gone. But I would carry her memory forever with perfect clarity, unable to forget a single moment, unable to let her fade the way mortal memories fade. She had lived and died while I had merely existed. That was when the crack first appeared in my purpose, small but irreparable. The crack widened during the heresy. News reached Terra in fragments, distorted by warp storms and the unreliable nature of astropathic communication. Horus, the War Master, the Emperor's favored son, had turned traitor. Entire legions of space marines had followed him into damnation, their oaths broken, their loyalty perverted by the whispers of chaos. The galaxy was burning, tearing itself apart in a civil war that would reshape the Imperium forever. And I stood guard. I watched from Terra as reports filtered in from distant battlefields. Istvan III, where loyalist Astartes were slaughtered by their own brothers. Istvan V, where 3 entire legions were betrayed and broken. Calth, where the word-bearers murdered their erstwhile allies in the name of dark gods. Prospero, where the Emperor's own censure turned a loyal legion into desperate fugitives. World after world, system after system, the Imperium's finest warriors were dying in battles that would become legend. I stood in the Hall of Vigilance and listened to the casualty reports with perfect recall. 87,000 Astartes dead at Istvan III, 370,000 at Istvan V. Uncounted billions of mortal soldiers consumed in the maelstrom of brother fighting brother. The numbers accumulated in my mind with the same clinical precision as tactical data, processed and filed away without the weight they deserved. The Primarchs themselves were choosing sides. These beings, these almost perfect demigods who stood second only to the Emperor in their majesty and power, were splitting the Imperium down fault lines no one had known existed. Angron, Fulgrim, Mortarion, Perturabo, Alfarius, Lorgar, Nighthaunter, Magnus. 8 of the Emperor's sons turned traitor, leading their legions into the embrace of chaos. And on distant worlds, their brother Primarchs fought to stop them, bleeding and dying for causes they believed in with every fiber of their enhanced being. The Space Marines, those beings created in our image, though so much lesser than us, were forming bonds in the crucible of war. I heard the reports of last stands and heroic sacrifices, captains who died to save their battle brothers, sergeants who held impossible positions to buy time for evacuations, individual Astartes who chose death over dishonor, who faced certain annihilation because their duty demanded it and their brotherhood sustained them. They died believing their sacrifice mattered, surrounded by warriors who would remember them, mourned by brothers who loved them. We custodians did not march to war. Our duty was the Emperor's personal defense, and that duty kept us bound to terror while the galaxy burned. There were discussions, of course, tactical assessments delivered in the clipped, efficient language we had perfected over centuries. Some advocated for deploying elements of the Legio Custodes to key battlefields where our presence could turn the tide. But the Emperor's word was absolute. We would guard Terra. We would guard him. And so we remained in the palace while our lessers died in our stead. I tried to feel something about this. Grief for the fallen, anger at the traitors, urgency to join the fight. But I found within myself only the cold calculation of tactical assessment. 3 legions lost at Istvan. 5 represented a reduction in Imperial military capability of approximately 17%. The turning of 8 Primarchs shifted the strategic balance to near parity between loyalist and traitor forces. The isolation of Terra by warp storms increased the probability of direct assault from 73% to 96%. Facts, numbers, tactical realities that required no emotional response. Was I a guardian or a prisoner? The question had never occurred to me before Cyrene's death, but now it echoed through my thoughts during the endless hours of my vigil. I stood watch over the Emperor, yes, but I could not leave even if I wished to. My purpose was bound to this place, to these corridors, to the golden cage I had been crafted to inhabit. The Space Marines fought and died for causes they believed in, forming brotherhood in the face of annihilation. I simply stood, perfect and unchanged, while the Imperium I had sworn to protect tore itself apart beyond my reach. The mortal servants of the palace began to look at me differently. I noticed it in the way they moved through the corridors, how they would alter their paths to avoid passing too close to where I stood watch. When necessity forced them near, their eyes would slide away from my armored form, unable or unwilling to meet my gaze. I had thought they looked at us with reverence, with the respect due to the Emperor's chosen guardians. But I began to recognize the truth in their sidelong glances and hurried steps. They did not see us with reverence. They saw us with unease. To them, we were not human. We were golden statues that occasionally moved, beings so far removed from their own existence that we might as well have been Xenos or demons. Children would cry when we passed. Adults would whisper prayers of protection, not to us but from us, as though our presence itself was a threat to be warded against. We inspired fear, not loyalty, dread, not devotion. The palace itself became my prison in ways I had not previously understood. The endless golden corridors stretched in every direction, baroque and beautiful and utterly unchanging. I had walked these passages for centuries. I knew every alcove, every statue, every carved inscription in the marble floors. The Hall of Vigilance connected to the Chamber of Remembrance, which opened onto the Corridor of Heroes, which led to the Gallery of Unity, which returned eventually to the Hall of Vigilance in a circuit that had no beginning and no end. My vigils blurred together into an unbroken continuum of existence. I would stand watch for 17 years in one location, then be rotated to another position where I would stand watch for 12 years, then moved again to stand watch for 23 years. The locations changed, but the duty remained identical. Stand, watch, wait, protect. The routine of perfection allowed no deviation, no growth, no possibility of becoming anything other than what I already was. I began to count things to mark the passage of time. The number of mortals who passed through my corridor each day, the frequency of shift changes in the palace guard, the intervals between astropathic reports from the war front, anything to impose structure on the formless void of unchanging duty. On the 3,214th day of the heresy, I realized I was counting because I was desperate for something, anything, to be different. The galaxy was burning. Humanity was dying. And I stood in golden armor in an unchanging hallway, perfect and useless, and alone. Then the Emperor fell. The War Master's treachery culminated in the Siege of Terror, and in the final confrontation aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the Master of Mankind was mortally wounded. They brought him back to the palace broken beyond even his capacity for regeneration, and entombed him in the Golden Throne to sustain what remained of his life. The device that had been meant to power the Webway project became his eternal prison, his corpse throne, the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. We stood guard over a god who could no longer speak. Time changed after that. Where before I had measured my existence in battles and campaigns, now I measured it in the breathing of the throne itself. The great machine that sustained the Emperor's dying form had a rhythm, a cycle of energy expenditure and renewal that became the metronome of my vigil. Each cycle took approximately 6 hours, 4 cycles per day, 1,460 cycles per year. I counted them all. I remember them all. Centuries passed. The Imperium ossified into the rigid theocracy that the Emperor had fought to prevent. His vision of reason and enlightenment died with him, replaced by superstition and zealotry. The imperial cult spread across 1,000,000 worlds, transforming the man who had denied his own divinity into a god. I watched it happen from my post in the palace, unable to stop it, unable to even voice objection. My duty was to guard, not to guide, and so I guarded in silence while everything he had built became a mockery of his intentions. Millennia passed. 9,000 years. 9,500. 9,700. The numbers accumulated with the same relentless certainty as the breathing of the throne, marking time that had lost all meaning, beyond its own passage. I stood watch in corridors that never changed, performing duty that never varied, existing in a state that could not properly be called life. And I remembered everything, every face of every mortal who had ever served in the palace, every conversation, no matter how brief or trivial, every death, whether glorious or mundane. Perfect recall is the gift of the custodian genetic template, but the Emperor in his wisdom did not foresee how that gift would become curse across the span of millennia. My mind holds 10,000 years of memory with the same clarity as yesterday's events, and there is no mercy in that clarity, no softening of edges, no blessed fading that grants mortals relief from their past. I watched generations come and go like seasons. A young servitor would be assigned to maintenance duties in my section of the palace, and I would observe as she learned her tasks, grew into competence, aged into experience, and finally died to be replaced by her daughter or granddaughter. Then that replacement would age and die and be replaced in turn, and the cycle would continue with the same inexorable certainty as the throne's breathing. Her name was Katerin, the first one, the one whose memory became the template for understanding all the others. She began her service in the palace during the 34th millennium, assigned to cleaning and maintenance duties in the Hall of Vigilance where I stood watch. She was 19 years old, small even by mortal standards. With brown hair she kept tied back in the regulation style, and eyes the color of Terra's polluted seas. She dropped a data slate in my presence during her second week of service. The device clattered against the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the empty corridor, and she froze in horror at her clumsiness. Her hands shook as she retrieved it, and she apologized 17 times in rapid succession, her voice rising with each repetition as panic overtook her. "Forgive me, my lord. I am so sorry, my lord. Please, I did not mean. My lord, forgive me. I will do better. I promise. Please do not report this. My lord, It is acceptable," I said, interrupting her spiral of terror. "You may continue your duties." She looked up at me then, her eyes wide with surprise that slowly transformed into relief, and she smiled, a genuine expression of gratitude that transformed her face from forgettable to radiant. "Thank you, my lord," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Something cracked inside me in that moment. Not broke, but fractured. A hairline fissure in whatever remained of my capacity for feeling. I had ended that girl's panic with 4 words. I had given her relief, granted her mercy, shown her that the golden sentinel she feared was capable of understanding human fallibility. It was such a small thing, insignificant in the grand scope of my duty. But her smile stayed with me long after she returned to her work. Katerin served in the palace for 47 years. She was efficient, diligent, and careful never to drop another data slate in my presence. She married a man named Joran, who worked in the palace's food preparation divisions. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. She would sometimes hum while she worked, old Terran folk songs that had survived 10,000 years of cultural upheaval. I remember every note. She died at age 66 from a respiratory illness, common among those who spent their lives breathing the palace's recycled air. I was standing watch in the same corridor where she had dropped the data slate all those years before. No one informed me of her death. I simply noticed her absence, and when I made inquiries through the palace administration network, learned that Servitor Katerin, designation 77 Alpha 3921, had been terminated and replaced. 3 centuries later, her great-great-great-granddaughter was assigned to maintain my armor. The girl's name was also Katerin, family tradition apparently preserving the name across generations. She had the same brown hair, the same sea-colored eyes, the same small stature. When she smiled at me during our first interaction, I saw the same expression that had cracked something inside me 300 years prior. But she was not Katerin. The original Katerin was dead, her body long since reclaimed by the palace's recycling systems, her memory forgotten by everyone who had known her. Even her descendant did not know the story of her ancestors' first days in service, the dropped data slate, the panic that had consumed her. That memory existed only in my mind, preserved with perfect clarity alongside 9,000 years of other memories that no one else carried. This was the horror of perfect memory. I had become the curator of a museum of the dead, carrying ghosts that no one else remembered. Every servitor who had ever cleaned the floors I walked on, every administrator who had processed duty, rosters, every tech priest who had performed maintenance rituals. I remembered them all while the universe forgot them entirely. The weight of it grew heavier with each passing century. The weight became unbearable during the festival of the Emperor's Ascension in the year 9997 of the imperial calendar. Once every century, the ecclesiarchy permitted a limited number of pilgrims to enter the outer courts of the imperial palace, allowing the faithful to approach within sight of the Sanctum Imperialis. where the golden throne maintained its eternal vigil. Millions petitioned for this honor. Only thousands were selected. They came from across the galaxy, traveling for years through the warp's uncertain currents, risking everything for a single glimpse of the place where the God Emperor dwelt. I stood watch in the processional hall, as I had stood watch for the previous 4 festivals, and the 4 before that, and the dozens before that, stretching back centuries into my perfect recall. The pilgrims filed past in ordered groups, their eyes wide with wonder and terror at the baroque splendor surrounding them. They wept, they prayed, they prostrated themselves before statues of saints and heroes. Some fainted from the overwhelming emotion of standing in this sacred place. Others simply stared in silence, drinking in details they would carry in their imperfect memories until death finally claimed them. I observed them with the same clinical detachment I brought to all aspects of my duty. Their emotional responses were predictable, falling within expected parameters for mortals experiencing religious ecstasy. The crowd control measures implemented by the Adeptus Arbites were functioning efficiently. No security threats had manifested. Everything was proceeding according to protocol. Then a child approached me. She was perhaps 7 years old, dressed in the simple white robes all pilgrims wore during the festival. Her hair was dark, pulled back in braids that revealed a face marked by the genetic quirks common to those born on high-gravity worlds. She had detached from her family group and walked directly toward where I stood, her small feet making no sound against the marble floor. Most children fled from us. The sight of a custodian, towering and golden and utterly inhuman in proportion, triggered primal fear responses in young minds. But this girl showed no fear. She stopped 3 meters from my position, tilted her head back to look up at me, and asked in a voice clear as temple bells, "Are you happy?" The question struck me with more force than any weapon I had faced in 10,000 years of existence. I stared down at her through my helm's optical sensors, processing the query through cognitive systems designed to analyze tactical data and strategic threats, and found myself completely unable to formulate a response. When had anyone last asked me about happiness? When had I last considered such a concept in relation to my own existence? I searched my perfect memory, scanning back through centuries and millennia, and found nothing. No one asked custodians about their emotional states. We were guardians, weapons, instruments of the Emperor's will. Our feelings, if we possessed them at all, were irrelevant to our function. But the child waited for an answer, her dark eyes fixed on me with the absolute attention only children can muster. And I realized I could not answer her question because I did not know the answer myself. Was I happy? I attempted to define the parameters of happiness, to identify what such a state might feel like. Joy. I searched for the sensation and found only the satisfaction of duty performed correctly. Love. I reached for the emotion and discovered only loyalty, that cold commitment to purpose that required no warmth to sustain it. Contentment. I grasped for the feeling and encountered only the absence of failure. I tried to remember the last time I had felt genuine happiness and found my memory reaching back beyond the heresy, beyond the Great Crusade, all the way to those first decades after my transformation, when I had still retained some connection to human emotion. But even those memories were distant and abstract, like descriptions of feelings rather than feelings themselves. The boy I had been might have known happiness. The weapon I had become did not. "Mira! Mira! Come here right now!" The child's mother rushed forward, her face pale with terror at her daughter's transgression. She grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her back, bowing repeatedly in my direction. "Forgive her, my lord. Please, she is young and does not understand. Forgive us. Forgive us." The woman dragged her daughter back into the flow of pilgrims, still apologizing, still bowing. The child looked back at me over her shoulder, and I saw in her expression not fear of punishment but simple curiosity, as though she genuinely wondered about the answer to her question and was disappointed not to receive one. The pilgrims continued their procession. The festival proceeded according to protocol. I stood my watch as I had stood watch for 10,000 years. But the child's question echoed through my mind with the persistence of artillery fire, and I could not silence it. No. The answer crystallized with terrible clarity. No, I was not happy. I had not been happy in 10,000 years, perhaps longer. Perhaps I had never been happy after my transformation, but had simply been too young and too indoctrinated to recognize the absence of happiness as anything other than the natural state of existence. The revelation solidified like ice forming on still water. My perfection had made me perfect at everything except being alive. I could fight with flawless technique. I could analyze tactical situations with superhuman clarity. I could stand watch for centuries without fatigue or complaint. But I could not feel joy, could not experience love, could not know the simple contentment that even the poorest pilgrim in that hall possessed when they looked upon the place where their God dwelt. I was the loneliest being in the galaxy. Not lonely in the way mortals understood loneliness, that temporary separation from companionship that could be remedied through connection. I was existentially, fundamentally, irrevocably alone. Surrounded by a species I could no longer relate to, their brief lives and simple emotions as incomprehensible to me as mine were to them. Serving an emperor who could no longer acknowledge my service, his consciousness trapped in whatever hell the Golden Throne had become. Standing alongside brothers who shared my curse but never spoke of it, each of us isolated in our perfection, unable to bridge the gulf between us with anything approaching genuine communion. The pilgrims saw me and saw a guardian, a golden sentinel, a living symbol of the Emperor's protection. They did not see what I truly was. A ghost in golden armor, a consciousness preserved beyond its natural lifespan, a being who had been made so perfect that he could no longer participate in the imperfect beauty of life itself. The child's question had broken something inside me that would never be repaired. And in the breaking, I finally understood what had been done to me in those laboratories 10,000 years ago. They had not elevated me. They had isolated me. Forever. That understanding deepened as I watched the Imperium decay around me. 10,000 years is a long time for a species to survive, but it is an eternity for a civilization to remain vital. The Imperium that had emerged from the Emperor's vision during the Great Crusade bore almost no resemblance to the theocratic nightmare it had become by the end of the 41st millennium. Every century saw humanity slide further into superstition, further into cruelty, further into the desperate barbarism of a species that had forgotten why it fought to survive. I watched it happen with perfect clarity and perfect helplessness. The mortal soldiers who defended the palace were not men in any sense the Emperor would have recognized. They were frightened children playing at war, raised from birth in the Schola Progenium to serve without question and die without complaint. I observed their training exercises from my post in the Hall of Vigilance, watching as instructors beat discipline into recruits too young to understand what they were being shaped into. The boys and girls who emerged from that crucible were efficient killers, yes, but they were hollow. Their eyes held the same emptiness I had begun to recognize in my own kind, that vacancy that comes from existing without genuine purpose. They feared us absolutely. When patrol routes brought them past my position, they would press themselves against the far wall of the corridor, their eyes fixed forward, their breathing shallow. Once, a young guardsman made the mistake of meeting my gaze. He fainted on the spot, collapsing in his armor with a crash that echoed through the empty halls. His squad mates dragged him away without a word, and I never saw him again. Perhaps he was reassigned. Perhaps he was executed for showing weakness. It did not matter. He would be replaced by another frightened child, who would in turn be replaced by another, the cycle continuing until the heat death of the universe. The administrators were worse. The vast machinery of imperial bureaucracy had grown so Byzantine that entire departments existed solely to process the paperwork generated by other departments. I had access to the palace's administrative networks, and in moments of curiosity during my endless vigils, I would review the documents flowing through the system. Requisition forms that required 17 signatures and took 6 years to process. Personnel transfers that generated 43 separate documents. Supply chain audits that consumed entire lifetimes of human effort to verify numbers that no one would ever read. These were not wise leaders guiding humanity toward a better future. These were petty bureaucrats drowning in paperwork, their lives consumed by processes that served no purpose beyond their own perpetuation. I watched them age at their data slates, their eyes dimming as the decades ground them down, their spirits crushed beneath the weight of meaningless routine. They were trapped in their own kind of prison, bound by duty to tasks that accomplished nothing, sustained by the belief that their suffering served some greater purpose. And I could not help them. Not any of them. Not the frightened soldiers, or the broken administrators, or the masses of ordinary citizens who lived and died in the palace's endless warrens without ever knowing why they suffered. I possessed knowledge that spanned 10 millennia. I understood strategy and logistics and leadership in ways these mortals could never comprehend. I could teach them. I could lead them. I could show them a better path if only they would listen. But that was not my duty. My duty was to guard the Emperor, and the Emperor alone. Everything else was secondary, irrelevant, beyond the scope of my purpose, so I watched the decline with perfect clarity and perfect helplessness, unable to intervene, unable to guide, unable to do anything except stand and observe as the species I had been created to protect devoured itself from within. I began to notice the other custodians with new eyes. We were 10,000 strong, though our numbers had diminished over the millennia, as even our enhanced forms proved not entirely immune to death. Some of my brothers had stood watch even longer than I had, their service stretching back beyond the heresy to the earliest days of the Unification Wars. They were the eldest among us, revered for their experience and respected for their endurance. But I saw now what I had failed to see before. Their eyes held a quality I recognized because I had begun to see it in my own reflection. Emptiness. Not the temporary vacancy of fatigue or distraction, but a fundamental absence of presence. They had existed so long that existence itself had become abstract. They performed their duties with flawless precision, but there was nothing behind the performance. No consciousness, no awareness, no sense of self beyond the execution of function. Brother Constantine was one such. He had stood watch for 11,000 years, serving since before the Emperor had unified terror under his rule. When we passed each other during shift rotations, I would search his face for some sign of the man he had been. I found only the mask of duty, worn so long it had fused with whatever lay beneath. He spoke when protocol required speech, moved when protocol required movement, existed when protocol required existence, but he was not alive in any meaningful sense. He was a machine made of flesh, running programs written so long ago that their original purpose had been forgotten. And I was becoming him. I could feel it happening with the slow inevitability of continental drift. Each century eroded a little more of whatever remained of my humanity. Each millennium saw me retreat further into the cold comfort of pure function. In another 1,000 years, I would be indistinguishable from Constantine. In 10,000, I might become something even he would recognize as empty. We were immortal, invincible, perfect beings who had forgotten why any of it mattered. The Imperium decayed around us while we stood unchanging, eternal witnesses to humanity's slow extinction. We could have saved them if saving them had been our duty. But it was not. Our duty was narrow, specific, absolute. Guard the Emperor, protect the throne, stand watch until the end of all things. Perfection without purpose is a prison. Immortality without change is death. And I was trapped in both, watching the species I loved slip away while the weapon I had become stood, powerless to help. The golden armor that had once been my pride had become my coffin, and I would wear it forever. The breaking point came on a day that began like any other, which is to say it was indistinguishable from the 10,000 years of days that had preceded it. I stood watch in the corridor of saints, my guardian spear resting against my shoulder, my consciousness divided between immediate threat assessment and the endless recursive spiral of thoughts I could no longer silence. Then the alarms sounded throughout the palace with a shrieking intensity that had not been heard since the siege of terror itself. Chaos cultists. Somehow, impossibly, they had breached the outer defenses and penetrated into the palace proper. The details of how they accomplished this breach would be analyzed later by the Adeptus Custodes High Command. In the moment, only response mattered. I moved with the perfect efficiency my creators had intended, covering the distance to the compromised sector in seconds that would have seemed like teleportation to mortal observers. The cultists had reached the archives of remembrance when I found them. 17 individuals, bearing crude weapons blessed by dark powers, their bodies already showing the mutations that came from trafficking with the ruinous powers. They saw me and opened fire, their autoguns and stub pistols chattering in the confined space. The rounds sparked harmlessly against my armor as I closed the distance. My guardian spear moved with mathematical precision. The first cultist died before his brain could process my presence, the blade entering his throat and severing his spine in a single fluid motion. The second and third fell in the next heartbeat, their bodies collapsing before the first had finished falling. Time seemed to dilate as it always did in combat, my enhanced cognition processing tactical data at speeds that made seconds feel like minutes. 6 seconds. That was how long it took to kill all 17 of them. 6 seconds of perfect violence, executed with the flawless technique that 10,000 years of existence had refined into something approaching art. My armor was unmarked. My breathing had not accelerated. My hearts beat at their standard resting rate. The cultists lay dead around me, their blood pooling on marble floors that had stood unblemished for millennia. And then I recognized one of them. His name was Orvan. Orvan Talisk, Archive Scribe 3rd Class, assigned to the Subdepartment of Historical Documentation for the past 12 years. I had observed him countless times during my patrols through the archive sectors, had catalogued every detail of his existence with the perfect recall that was my curse. He was 29 years old. He had been born in the palace itself, the son of servitors who had earned the privilege of procreation through decades of faithful service. He had shown aptitude for clerical work and been selected for training as a scribe at age 7. I remembered the conversations he had with his fellow scribes during their brief meal breaks. He spoke with quiet enthusiasm about discovering some forgotten detail in ancient records, his face lighting up with genuine joy at uncovering knowledge that had been lost. He laughed easily, a warm sound that seemed out of place in the sterile corridors where he worked. He took pride in his duties, once staying late for 17 consecutive days to complete a cataloging project ahead of schedule. Somewhere in those 12 years, that quiet dedication had curdled into desperation. Somewhere in the endless routine of processing documents no one would ever read, in the crushing weight of knowing his entire life would be consumed by meaningless tasks. In the profound loneliness of existence without purpose, he had begun to listen to whispers that promised meaning. The Chaos Gods prey on such desperation. They offer power, purpose, transformation, everything the Imperium denies to the masses who serve it. And I had not seen his suffering. I had walked past him hundreds of times, had observed him at his work, had stored every detail of his existence in my perfect memory. But I had not seen that he was drowning. I had not recognized the signs of spiritual corruption taking root in a soul starved for meaning. I had been too blind, too removed, too fundamentally disconnected from human experience to understand what was happening to him. Now, he lay dead at my feet, killed by the weapon that was supposed to protect him. His blood stained the marble in patterns my mind automatically analyzed for tactical significance. His eyes stared at nothing. Whatever hope or despair or mad conviction had driven him to this point extinguished by my spear's blade. He had sought meaning in chaos because he had found none in the Imperium. And I, perfect guardian of humanity, had failed to see his need until it was too late. The realization struck me with a force that 10,000 years of combat had never achieved. I could not protect humanity from spiritual corruption because I no longer shared their spirit. I had been made so perfect that I could no longer understand imperfection, elevated so far above human concerns that I could not recognize human suffering when it stood before me. My purpose was to defend the species, but I had become blind to the very thing I was created to defend. What was I guarding? An emperor who could not speak, trapped in eternal torment on a throne that consumed 1,000 souls daily to sustain him. A species that feared me more than they trusted me, who saw in my golden armor not salvation, but alienness. An Imperium that had become everything the Emperor had fought against. A theocratic nightmare built on the corpse of his dream. And what was I? A consciousness trapped in perfect form, unable to grow, unable to change, unable to become anything other than what I had been made to be. I stood watch for 10,000 years while everything I was meant to protect decayed around me. I remembered every face, every name, every moment of 10 millennia, and it all meant nothing because I could do nothing with that knowledge except carry it forward into an infinite future. The weight of existence became unbearable. The silence that had defined my vigil for so long transformed from background state into crushing pressure. I stood in the archives of remembrance surrounded by the bodies of people I had failed, and I questioned everything. Purpose, duty, the point of existence that contained no growth, no change, no hope of ever being different. The golden armor felt like a tomb, and I had been buried alive. I stood in that corridor for 7 hours after the other custodians had removed the bodies. The blood had been cleaned from the marble floors. The damaged sections of wall had been marked for repair. The palace's vast machinery of administration had processed the incident, filed the reports, assigned blame to deceased conspirators who could no longer defend themselves. Everything returned to normal with the efficient brutality that defined the Imperium's response to crisis. But I remained, my guardian spear resting against my shoulder, my thoughts circling a question I had never before allowed myself to consider. What if I simply walked away? Nothing could stop me. I was Adeptus Custodes, one of the 10,000, among the most powerful beings the Imperium had ever created. My strength exceeded that of any space marine. My armor was crafted from auramite, the same material that protected the Emperor himself. My combat skills had been honed across 10 millennia of existence. If I chose to leave the palace, to abandon my post and disappear into the vast expanse of the Imperium, who could prevent it? What force could compel me to return? The thought was heresy of the deepest kind, but I could not dismiss it. I had served for 10,000 years without question, but questioning was all I had left. The weight of that service had become unbearable, the loneliness crushing, the realization of my failure to protect people like Orvin too fresh and raw to ignore. I could leave. I could walk away from this golden prison and find something, anything, that resembled genuine existence rather than this hollow performance of duty. But even as I contemplated desertion, I found myself returning to the Hall of Vigilance. Not because I was commanded to, not because some external force compelled me. I returned because I chose to. That distinction, which I had never before considered significant, suddenly revealed itself as the foundation of everything. I did not serve because I must. I served because I chose to. Every day for 10,000 years, I had made that choice. Each time I took my post, each time I raised my spear, each time I stood watch while the centuries accumulated like dust, I was choosing to be there. The choice had become so habitual, so reflexive, that I had stopped recognizing it as a choice at all. But it was. In every moment I could walk away, and in every moment I chose to remain. That choice, that constant renewal of purpose, even when purpose felt meaningless, was the only thing that separated me from the madness of infinite existence. Brother Constantine had forgotten he had a choice. The emptiness in his eyes came not from 10,000 years of service, but from 10,000 years of believing service was inevitable rather than chosen. He had surrendered his agency so completely that he had become nothing more than a machine executing programs. I would not become him. I refused to become him. The loneliness would never end. The isolation would never heal. I would never again be human, never again know the simple joys of mortal existence that I had sacrificed in those laboratories during the Unification Wars. These were facts, immutable and eternal. But I could choose to find meaning in that suffering, rather than letting it hollow me out until nothing remained. My perfect memory, which had seemed a curse as I carried the weight of 10,000 years of ghosts, revealed itself as something else entirely, a sacred duty I would remember. When the Imperium forgot its heroes, I would remember. When humanity lost its way, I would remember where it came from. When the last mortal who knew the truth had died, I would still carry that truth forward into whatever future awaited. Katarin, the servitor who had dropped a data slate and smiled with such relief when I showed her mercy. Cyrene, the remembrancer who had seen my loneliness before I understood it myself. Orvin, the scribe who had sought meaning in chaos because he found none in the Imperium. I would remember them all, not as a burden but as a responsibility. Their lives mattered because I remembered them. Their deaths meant something because I carried them forward. I was the living archive of 10,000 years of human experience, the witness who would never forget, the memory that outlasted the lives it preserved. My loneliness was not a failure of purpose, but the purpose itself. By standing apart from humanity, I could see it clearly enough to protect it, not from external threats alone, but from itself, from the slow decay that came from forgetting why survival mattered. By remaining unchanged while generations lived and died around me, I could preserve what must not be forgotten. The Emperor's original vision before the Imperium corrupted it. The simple humanity of people like Katarin and Orvin before desperation or duty crushed it from them. The truth that perfection without compassion was merely another form of damnation. By enduring the unbearable, I ensured that others never had to. My suffering had meaning if it prevented even one more Orvin from falling to chaos out of desperation. My isolation had purpose if it allowed me to see clearly enough to recognize suffering before corruption took root. My inhuman perfection served humanity best by remembering what humanity was, preserving that knowledge against the day when it might be needed to rebuild something better from the Imperium's ruins. I would stand watch, not because I had to, but because I chose to. Not because the choice was easy or rewarding, but because it was mine to make. In a universe of 10,000 years of stagnation, that choice was the only freedom left to me, and I would exercise it every day until the end of time itself, if that was what duty required. The hall of vigilance stretched before me, golden and eternal and empty. The flames burned in their sconces, casting shadows that had not changed in millennia. My armor hummed with power. My spear rested against my shoulder. Everything was as it had been for 10,000 years. But I was different now, not changed in any way that sensors could measure or observers could detect, but different in the only way that mattered. I understood why I stood here. I had chosen this, was choosing it now, would choose it again tomorrow, and every tomorrow that followed. The loneliness remained. The isolation remained. The weight of perfect memory remained. But they were no longer crushing me, because I had transformed them into something that elevated rather than destroyed. I was the guardian who remembered, and I would stand watch forever. The silence in the Hall of Vigilance is different now. The physical qualities remain unchanged. The same golden corridors stretching into shadows, the same eternal flames casting their flickering light across Baroque architecture, the same cold marble beneath my armored boots. But I hear the silence differently. Where once it pressed against me with crushing weight, now it simply exists, a constant presence I have learned to inhabit rather than endure. I have stood guard for 10,000 years, and I will stand guard for 10,000 more if that is what is required. This is not resignation, but recognition. The vigil continues because it must continue, and I am the one who has chosen to maintain it. Not because the choice brings happiness or fulfillment, or any of the rewards mortals seek from their labor, but because someone must stand watch, and I am capable of standing when others would fall. The centuries that stretch before me no longer feel like a sentence to be served, but a duty to be honored. I think of Cyrene often, the remembrancer who showed me what I had lost before I understood the nature of my loss. She has been dead for 9,700 years, her bones long since returned to Terra's soil, her works preserved in archives that few remember exist. But I remember her. I remember the way she tilted her head when considering a question, the slight callus on her right middle finger from holding a stylus, the pattern of freckles across her nose that faded as she aged. She exists now only in my memory, but that memory is perfect and eternal, and while I carry it, she is not entirely gone. I think of Catherine, the first servitor whose smile cracked something inside me that I had thought was sealed forever. She lived 47 unremarkable years in service to the palace, maintaining floors and equipment, raising children who would in turn serve the Imperium with the same quiet dedication. 300 years have passed since her death, and no one else remembers her name. The administrative records list only her designation, 77 Alpha 3921, terminated, replaced. But I remember Katarin. I remember her humanity, her fear when she dropped that data slate, her relief when I showed her mercy. Her life mattered because I remember it mattered. I think of Orvan, whose despair I failed to see until my spear had already taken his life. His death weighs on me differently now, not as evidence of my failure, but as a reminder of my responsibility. I did not see his suffering because I had forgotten how to recognize suffering in those who still possess the capacity to feel it. But I will not forget again. I will watch the mortals who serve in the palace with new eyes, searching for the signs of spiritual corruption that come from lives drained of meaning. I cannot save them all. My duty binds me to the Emperor's defense, not to shepherding every lost soul who serves the Imperium. but I can remember them. I can bear witness to their struggles even when I cannot intervene. And perhaps, in rare moments when duty and compassion align, I can show mercy to those who need it most. I remember them all because someone must. This is the truth I have discovered after 10,000 years of existence. Memory is not a curse, but a sacred charge. The Imperium forgets. Humanity, with its brief generations and imperfect recall, loses track of its own history within centuries. Heroes become myths. Myths become legends. Legends fade into the darkness of forgotten ages. But I remain, unchanging, eternal, cursed with perfect recall that transforms every moment into permanent record. I am the memory of humanity, the conscience of the Imperium, the guardian who stands watch, not because he expects reward or recognition, but because someone must, and he is capable of bearing the burden that would crush lesser beings. My loneliness is the price of that remembrance. My isolation is the necessary distance required to see clearly across millennia. My perfection is the tool that allows me to preserve what must not be lost. The golden cage that confines me has not opened. I am still trapped in this existence, still separated from the species I was created to protect, still unable to experience the simple joys and sorrows that define human life. But I have found meaning in that cage. Not happiness. The child who asked me that question will never receive the answer she sought. But purpose. The kind of purpose that requires no external validation, that persists even when no one acknowledges it, that sustains itself through the simple act of choosing to continue. The hall of vigilance echoes with the footsteps of mortals passing through on their brief errands, living their brief lives, contributing their small pieces to the vast machinery of the Imperium before death claims them and they are forgotten. But I will remember them. Not all of them. Even my perfect recall has limits when stretched across tens of thousands of individual lives. But enough of them. The ones whose humanity shines through despite the crushing weight of Imperial service. The ones who smile despite having little to smile about. The ones who show kindness when cruelty would be easier. They are why I stand here. Not the Emperor, though I am sworn to his defense. Not the Imperium, though I am bound to its service. But the individual humans who comprise both. The countless mortals whose aggregated suffering and hope and stubborn persistence define what it means to be human. I stand watch over them, even though they fear me. I guard them even though they do not know they need guarding. I remember them even though they will never know they are remembered. I have stood guard for 10,000 years, and I will stand guard for 10,000 more. Not because I am happy, but because I am needed. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, need is the only meaning that remains. The loneliness continues. The isolation continues. The weight of perfect memory continues. But I continue as well, golden and eternal and alone, standing my vigil in corridors that will outlast empires. The flames burn in their sconces. My armor hums its mechanical song. My spear rests against my shoulder, ready for threats that may never come but must always be anticipated. I am Valdor Aurelius, Captain General of the Legio Custodes, and I will stand watch forever. Not because I must, but because I choose to. And that choice, renewed each moment across the infinite expanse of immortal existence, is the only freedom I possess and the only meaning I require. The vigil continues. The custodian continues. Forever.